Hello, Professor Kent Lee here, and in this video I'm going to talk about pronunciation, specifically consonants, with a focus on the consonants of English and how the consonant sounds of English are produced in the mouth. So we'll be talking about the vocal tract, that is this kind of passageway from the throat all the way through the lips, the mouth, the nose and nasal cavity, and all the little organs in there that move in order to make consonant sounds. And that is the vocal tract, the speech organs, the articulators that articulate or produce consonant sounds. We'll talk about those. And in this video, I'm going to be using IPA symbols, that is, symbols of the International Phonetic Alphabet. These are an international system of symbols used by linguists to accurately represent the sounds of any language in the world, all possible sounds of all languages in the world, human languages. These are universal. They are designed to describe sounds of languages regardless of how a sound might be written in the alphabet or writing system of that language. This is same symbols for all languages. Now, if you are from the US or England and you're not used to learning languages and language textbooks and dictionaries, you might not be familiar with these, but these are the international symbols that most people in the world use. If you are learning English in another country as a second language, you're probably familiar with these symbols. However, it's possible that the books in your country might occasionally take shortcuts or use simplifications and might not use the correct symbols. In this video, I'm using the correct symbols, the accurate correct symbols that linguists use for describing English sounds and other sounds. So, when we talk about consonants, we're talking about sounds that involve the speech organs either blocking the airstream or doing something, moving in order to modify the airstream noticeably. And there are different kinds of consonants. We'll talk about those. We're going to talk about consonants in terms of important features that linguists talk about. Place of articulation, manner of articulation, and something called voicing. So place of articulation refers to where they are produced in the mouth or the vocal tract. Manner of articulation refers to how they are produced. And voicing is another cool thing that I'll get to later. So let's look at the vocal tract. And let's think about, okay, what organs are used in making consonants? What have we got here? We've got the lips and the teeth. Then we've got, behind the teeth, the gum ridge, or the alveolar ridge is the proper term. You can just call it the gum ridge, that's fine. So the gums are the fleshy part around your teeth, that hold your teeth in. And behind the front teeth, there's what's called the gum ridge. You can feel it here. That's your gum ridge. That's your gum ridge behind the front teeth where it kind of goes up and there's this kind of ridge that you can feel. The technical term or proper term in linguistics and biology is the alveolar ridge, the alveolar region. We'll talk about alveolar sounds. A lot of sounds are made in that area in English and in other languages. Then back there, the bony hard part of the mouth, what we often call the roof of the mouth, linguists call the palate or the hard palate. Right here. And a few sounds are made there. We've got the nasal cavity in your nose, and a few sounds are made there. And then you go past the hard palate. That's your velum, that soft tissue way back in the back of your mouth, way back there. That's your velum. Sometimes it's called the soft palate. And then going further down, I'm not going to stick my finger down there. There's the glottis or the vocal cords. You probably know them as vocal cords. Glottis is the more technical term. And those are a couple of flaps of tissue in the windpipe, and they can kind of pull back and let the air go through, or they can kind of come together somewhat and vibrate. As the air sets them into vibration, they vibrate. And that plays an important part in English. And then that's all contained in the voice box or pharynx. And there are a few other organs which we don't need to get into right here. But let's start with place of articulation, where they are made, and then how they are made. Well, let's start with maybe the easiest, most obvious examples. A lot of sounds are made in the alveolar area, the gum ridge area. So let's start with T and S. They're both made in that area, but how are they made? Try playing with these sounds for a bit. T, s, t, s, t. S. So what you'll quickly realize is t, the T. The tongue tip touches the alveolar ridge, or maybe right behind it. It briefly blocks the airflow and then releases. So these are called stop sounds, or sometimes plosive sounds. There's a stop and then a release. It's usually a stop and release. It blocks the airflow and then releases the air. Now, there are certain cases where you might not have a release, like when a T is at the end of a word, like in bat, in English, bat. But usually it's a stop-release kind of motion, like two. It's a stop sound. Now, the S is different. You don't feel the tongue tip touching anything. If this is the top of the mouth, the tongue tip is coming up here, and it's kind of partly blocking the airflow, but the airflow is being forced through this narrow opening and is creating friction. So it's a friction sound, or we call it a fricative. S is a fricative. It's a friction sound. So we have stop sounds and we have fricative sounds. And those are very common in English and other Western languages. Now compare the S and the Z. C and Z. Z. Put your hand on your throat right here. Z. Z. Do you feel the difference? Z. S and Z are exactly the same. The tongue position and everything is exactly the same. The only difference between S and Z is that down here you've got vibration for the Z. The vibration is coming from the vocal cords of the glottis. They're kind of coming together and the air is putting them into motion. The airstream sets it into motion. They vibrate several thousand times a second. That's an effect called voicing, because it's the vocal cords, voicing. And so sounds like Z are called voiced. Sounds like S are unvoiced or voiceless. So we have voiced sounds like Z and voiceless or unvoiced sounds like S. And we've got stops and fricatives. Now compare T and D. D. How are they different? They're the same in terms of the place of articulation and the manner, tongue tip and the gum ridge, but D is voiced. Now you can't really hold and maintain a D for, it's kind of hard because it by nature is a stop release sound. But you can test this more easily with fricatives like zzz, which you can hold for a long time. T and D are stops or plosives. S and Z are fricative sounds, and they're all alveolar. Now we've got sounds like N, L, and R. N. It's similar to a D or T. The tongue is touching, but what is happening? Well, the velum, that is the soft tissue in the back of the throat, is moving, and it's sending most of the air through the nasal cavity. In other words, it's coming out your nose. So air is released through your nose instead of through your mouth for N. So we call it a nasal sound. It's nasal, N. It's alveolar nasal, N. Now what about L and R? L, R, L, R. L is touching, and then the air is kind of floating around the side of the tongue. L. And that's it. It's not really blocking the airflow. There's no friction. It's just air gliding around the tongue. L. Now what about R? R. Air is kind of gliding over the tongue. The tongue tip is not touching anything. It's not touching up there. R. So the R is what we call a glide sound, and the L is it's a special thing. It's not really glide, but you can kind of lump it in with R's and other stuff, but it's really something different. Okay, the R is a glide sound. The air is simply gliding over it as the as the tongue is moving. R. And if you're teaching this sound to maybe people who are learning English for the first time, you can think about growling like a dog. A dog goes grrr, the tongue is somewhat curled just a tiny bit, and it's pointing toward the alveolar area or behind it, somewhat rough. And famously, older generations of Asian learners have trouble with L and R, not because there's anything wrong with their tongue or their mouth. It's just that they weren't ever taught properly. They learned at a time when there was no focus on pronunciation teaching. It was all textbook English and grammar. A lot of Asians today, younger Asians, as far as I can tell, don't have much of a problem with L and R. So we've got your basic ideas here. Place of articulation like the gum ridge, manner of articulation like stops and fricatives and glide sounds and nasal n sounds. We've got voicing like z, z, like in the Z and the T. By the way, glides and nasals are almost always voiced like n, la, r. So we won't worry about voicing in connection with those. We'll talk about voicing in connection mainly with stops and fricatives. So, got the basic idea. Place of articulation, manner of articulation, voicing. Now let's go on. Let's go through the mouth and consider different places of articulation. We'll talk about the lips. Sometimes they see that in linguistics text, the technical term is labial, Latin term here for these things. Teeth or dental. Of course, the alveolar, as in the gum ridge. Palatal, the palatal area, the velar area, and a little bit of the glottal area. So let's go through, starting from the front part of the vocal tract. What sounds are made with the lips? M, im, m. It's a nasal sound made with the lips, kind of blocking the air, and the air comes out through the nose. M. There's also P and B, b, p, p. What's happening to the airflow? It's stopping and releasing the airflow. P, p. And in English, you can hold up a paper to your mouth and p, p. You can also sort of do with t. Okay, p, b. B is of course voiced. B, b. What else? Well, lips and the teeth. V, F and V, like fat, vat, fat, vat. So it's the lower lips and the front upper teeth. Fat, vat. These are fricative sounds. The air's being kind of forced between the teeth and the lips. It's creating the friction sound. Okay. Okay, those are easy. Now, going a little bit further back, we've got the TH sounds. And oh, those are tricky, aren't they? For a lot of people learning English. You might have been taught to use the tongue tip between the teeth, and yes, you can do that, that's fine. Or the tongue tip behind the upper front teeth, like that. Either way is fine. I think native English speakers do both, depending on maybe on what other sounds are nearby next to it. Thing, thing, thing. I usually use my tongue tip behind the teeth, but of course, some words like health, I have to stick the tongue out. You don't have to stick your tongue out very much. Don't be rude. No, don't be a lizard. Just okay, like that. Now, I'll use the angled brackets to indicate spelling. That's the spelling. And then the slash marks to indicate the linguistic symbols for the sounds, meaning this is a regular sound of the language, the double slash marks. So we have one spelling in English for two sounds, and this is confusing. It's because the Latin alphabet was not really the best choice for certain sounds of English, like the TH sounds and also the sh, ch, and j sounds. Two sounds, we got th and th. Th. The is voiced, of course. Th. So the symbols, the first symbol, the voiceless, that symbol is the Greek letter theta. There's a good reason for that. The second symbol, th, is kind of an old Norse Viking letter or Old English letter called ev, still used in Icelandic. Ev is the name of the symbol, but you don't need to know that. Okay, the first one, the voiceless sound, the symbol theta is used because a lot of words with this sound in English come from Greek. And some come from Older English like thick and thin, and some come from Greek. So a little tip for you, when you see new academic words in English spelled with th, it's probably the voiceless th, because most words in English that are used in academic, scientific, or technical contexts, especially words that may not be familiar to you, are from Greek, and usually the Greek sound is th. So the is common in older English words, particularly in kind of minor function words, this, that, these, those, the, there, thus, therefore, and such. So a lot of Asians have trouble with that, more so because they just weren't taught properly, especially older generations. They're not that hard, but it's just that they're not terribly common sounds in languages of the world. And so they're a little unfamiliar. And sometimes they're harder to hear. Little tip, these dental fricatives, the, because they're friction sounds, the energy involved is a lot lower. You can't put a lot of energy or force into this sound. So they sound softer than other fricatives like F or S or Z or V. Other fricative sounds, F, V, S, Z, tend to sound louder than the dental or TH sounds, the. And that's one way you can distinguish them, by the way. That means you also have to listen harder, especially because these are in minor words like the, this, and that, which sometimes affect the meaning. A little variant of the alveolar sounds that I should mention, coming back to alveolar sounds, the T in English, before an unstressed vowel, we'll talk about stress maybe in another video. In American English, often changes to sort of a flap. The tongue makes just a flap. We call it a flap type, sort of light contact with the alveolar gum ridge. And you've probably heard this in North American English, like better. So British would say better, better. And butter in British is butter. American, butter. British, little. American, little. So it might sound like a Japanese or Korean R, because it kind of does. It's a similar type of sound, actually. Is this just a variant or a variation of the T in between vowels before an unstressed syllable, like better, butter, little? You don't need to say it, but just be aware that's what it is, because it's just natural in North American English. We use it all the time. Almost all the time, when you have a T between vowels and it's before an unstressed syllable, an unstressed vowel, it turns into this sort of flat D, and you'll see one of these symbols used for it. That little kind of hook thing is actually the proper IPA symbol. And some books will just use a capital D. It's easier. Going further back in the mouth. Okay. I should talk about some other glide sounds while I'm here, because you've got a palatal glide, y, like in yes and year. Now, a lot of books will use the symbol Y for it, but the proper IPA symbol is a J, because IPA was influenced by European languages, and in some European languages they use the letter J for a Y sound. I forgot to mention the W. It's another glide sound. So for the Y, like in yes, the air is kind of gliding over the middle of the tongue, between the middle of the tongue and the palate. For W, there's gliding of the air involving the lips and also the back of the tongue, back there, kind of toward the velum, But the y and wa are easy. I don't think you have any problem with that. Going a bit further back, okay, the velar area, way back there, g, k. The G and the K are back there. That's easy. We've also got the glottis, and there's at least one sound there. H, the H. It's a glottal fricative. H. Friction sound, air kind of being pushed between the vocal cords. H. That's easy. I don't think you have any problem with that. Oh, there's also back in the velar area, there's the like in ring, ring. Now in English and in other languages, that can only occur at the end of a word, but there are languages in the world where you can start a word with an sound, like ngo, nga. Try it, it's fun. Those are the basic sounds of English, except there's some tricky ones I forgot to mention. Palatal sounds. Okay, sh, like in she, and zh, like in beige, beige. Okay, for these, your tongue is curled up and it's pointing kind of toward the palatal area, or somewhere between the alveolar and palatal area. Shh, and it's creating friction. Shh, and you voice it. Zh, zh, like in beige, pleasure, decision, vision, zh. Okay. Those are not too hard. It's just that a lot of people were never taught properly how to say those. Tongue curled up, pointing toward the back of the mouth. Now, for these sounds, you can also touch the tongue and then create friction at the same time. So there's a stop, release, and friction at the same time. Ch, ch, like cherry, ch. So it's touching and then releasing and creating friction. Ch, cherry, chew, and then j, which is voiced j, like judge, judge. So for these, the tongue needs to be curled up, j, j, and touching back there. So those are the sounds of English, pretty much most of them, I think. Now, a few other things I will mention. We've talked about the key distinctive things in English: place, manner of articulation, voicing. Now, there's another feature of consonants which doesn't make a huge difference in that it doesn't distinguish the sound, but it's relevant. So we've been talking about sounds that are distinctive, like you change the sound and it changes the word and it changes the meaning. Fat, vat, bat, pat. You change the sounds and it changes the word, changes the meaning. There is one consonant feature in English that doesn't really change the sound. We're not talking about making distinctively different sounds and words, but it's a relevant feature that's maybe relevant for managing your accent. It's called aspiration. So I take a piece of paper and I say p, p, pat, pat, two. You can feel it, the breath coming out. You can see it. That's called aspiration, the heavy breath, the puff of air that comes with stop sounds in English most of the time, but not always. And in other languages, it makes it a different sound altogether. In some languages, the aspiration is very important, not so much in English, but it is something that depends on the position in the word, where in the word is the sound. And it's not going to change the word or the meaning if you mispronounce it, but it might be something that leads to an accent. So look at the P in pepper. Pepper. Which one has aspiration? Pepper. 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 The first P has aspiration. P. The second one does not. Pepper. Why? In English, aspiration falls on stop consonants, voiceless stop consonants, P, T, and K sounds before a stressed vowel or before a stressed syllable. So the first syllable of pepper is stressed. The second syllable of pepper is unstressed. So pepper, aspiration on the first one. Total, total. And again, the second T is between vowels and it becomes that sort of flat D-like thing. Total. Aspiration in the first T, or potato also. Clicker, clicker, k. The first K sound has aspiration, the second does not. The second one is a soft K, clicker. So you've got aspirated P and then a soft P like in pepper, aspirated T and a soft T like in total or potato, potato, and same thing for clicker, aspirated and then soft K sound. Okay, so those are the sounds, the consonant sounds of English. Now let's have some fun and talk briefly about sounds in other languages. Just a quick tour, just for fun. lip sounds. There are languages where you have both lips, fricative with both lips. There's a v, which is sort of a sound in Spanish, v, like haber, and then a voiceless, which is kind of a variant in Japanese, like fuji in Japanese. The R in English is a sort of glide sound, and technically in IPA, the correct IPA symbol is an upside down R for the English R, but your books probably use a regular R, and that's fine, that's clear enough. But in other languages, the R is often a trill, like a r, r. And in other languages, some of the alveolar sounds are used with the tongue touching the teeth, not the gum ridge, like in Romance languages like French, Spanish, Italian. La, na, ta, the, using the teeth. The R in Chinese tends to be very bent back. The tongue is bent further back. R, and sometimes it even gets kind of a friction quality, like zh, zh, in Chinese. So if you're a Chinese speaker, try not to bend your tongue so far back, kind of point it more toward the alveolar area if you're worried about fixing your accent. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with the foreign accent. If you speak English as a foreign language, that's great. I mean, it's kind of a hard language. And so if you can speak English with an accent, that's still cool. Don't worry. Some other sounds, velar sounds. So K and G are velar stops. You also have fricatives back there in some languages. H, a lot of languages have h. German, Dutch, Arabic, Hebrew, Russian. Many languages of the world have h. Chinese and Spanish have sort of a soft h. And then there's a r, where you voice it in some languages. Finally, the uvula, one of my favorite things. That little thing that hangs down in the back of your mouth, it looks like a punching bag behind the velar area. That's the uvula. There are uvular sounds. There is a r, a uvular r, like in German and French, r. And you can get a uvular stop, like ha, ha, like in Arabic and some languages, ha. And the glottis. There's a stop sound made with the glottis. Now in English we do this. It's not like a regular sound of English. It's sort of like it's just a variant sound. It sometimes adds expressiveness to certain expressions in English. Think about if I say oh and oh, or ow, ow, ah, ah. So the second one of each pair, oh, oh, ah, ah, ow, ow, it's different because it's got a glottal stop, which in English it's not a normal sound, a regular sound of English. It just adds some expressiveness to an expression and interjection. It is a regular sound in some languages. It is possible to pronounce it by itself. I'll do it for you. You can have fun with this. You can have fun trying. I don't know if that comes out well over the microphone. That's a glottal stop. It's fun to play with. Okay, so we have learned about consonant sounds, especially for English, how they are made, the place of articulation, the manner of articulation, the voicing. Those are the key components of English consonants that are essential for producing them correctly. Now, other things, if you want to work on your accent and such, there are things like the aspiration and also the correct position of your tongue for palatal consonants like sh, ch, and such. That's something to work on if you're trying to fix your accent. Okay, those are the consonant sounds of English. I hope this is helpful. Try this on your own. Maybe you want to do this when nobody is around because people catch you practicing consonants like sh, zh, and they might think there's something wrong with you. But okay, when you're alone, play with these different sounds, the sounds of English, the sound of other languages that you know, and try to figure out on your own just exactly where these sounds are made and how they are made in terms of place, manner, voicing, and all that. Just play with them, have fun. That's the best way to learn this stuff. Okay, that's it for now. And in other videos in the series, we'll talk about vowels and we'll talk about aspects of English for Asian learners learning English. So until then, I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.